I'm here.
All right.
Yes, hello.
All right. Well, Shauna is driving your slides today. So if you'll just let her know next slide when you're ready, I will turn it over to you to carry it on. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Dee Dee. So welcome everybody, and I know there will continue to be people joining us. Wanted to kind of go over our agenda first. We'll do the kind of welcome and introductions, and then David's going to talk through some of the work group logistics that we go over each and every week, just to kind of remind everybody. And then we're going to kind of continue the use case review with Joe and David and myself, going through each of those, and kind of having a back and forth on that, and looking for comments from everyone in the chat, just to kind of walk through each thing that we're doing, and then we'll talk about questions and next steps. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So as part of this is kind of a continuation where we're talking about those priority work items, and I want to remind everybody what we talked about last time, is that we're going to continue to build out that list through December 17th, which will be our last meeting of the year, and really appreciate all the comments from last week. And I looked at the list before the call, and it looks like several other people have added things, and we're going to continue to go through those and talk through them, and kind of, work towards right sizing these things. Because ultimately, remember what our goal is by the spring is to have that list that we're going to go forward with. And so it doesn't mean we have to accomplish anything on any of those things, but we've got to hone it down. So it's less about solving the problem and more about deciding what problems we should tackle. And so again, welcome ongoing feedback. And we received a lot of feedback, both during and after the meeting, and greatly appreciate that at that level of engagement, because we know everybody, including ourselves, has a daytime job too. So this is really important, and greatly appreciated that you're able to offer this time to do. So as a reminder, also, we will go on hiatus on December 24th and December 31st for obvious reasons. We expect that attendance would be very low during that time period, and we will resume back on January 7th. Of course, if you have time over the break and are bored with the eggnog and other things, you can always add to the documents. Those will always still be available, but we'll get back on January 7th and get back into gear. So that was all I had to cover there. And I didn't know, I think I'm going to hand this over to David, and then we're going to go back through those use cases with Joe after David finishes this section.
Thank you, Bill, and also echo the sentiments. Welcome, and really, really encouraging to see such great engagement here, and so really thank you for taking time to engage in this effort. I hope everybody is safe and well. And just to highlight again, the work group members and this tends to be growing as well. That we really have 265 participants who have registered across 187 organizations across the country. And if you look here, we have a really broad representation across the industry of the different stakeholders in domain expertise. So I think that really makes for, and is a testament to the great discussions that we've had. And we also, again, still encourage you to invite other colleagues to future discussions. This is really, an open forum and open to all participants, so all are welcome. Next slide. And just to re-review the meeting and work group logistics, we really I can't express enough appreciation for the team here, Dee Dee and Joe and Shauna for all of the real heavy lifting here, for keeping all of the documentation and all of the organization in one central place here. So if you haven't found your way to the Sequoia project, site where the data usability workgroup exists. All of our recordings are there. All of the calendar invites are there that are available to download and add to your calendar. Every meeting note, and we're capturing comments. And then as has been reviewed before, the ability to add, which glad to see everybody that people have engaged in that effort to add to the documents and the topics of the issues and items that we're discussing. And I'm seeing here that Dee Dee also posted that the meeting materials and the calendar invites. There's the link there, and then there's a folder for the work group materials. So in your time, find your way there, and we encourage the input and feedback there. Next slide. And the next two slides really are just to go over the breadth of the organizations. And these are represented by the Sequoia Project's members who are engaged in this effort. So we really want to thank our members for the continued support. And that really enables us to host this work group. You see here, and recently some new Sequoia members added on, and we anticipate even more members will be coming on as well. So thanks again. And at that, we're going to hand it over to Joe to walk through the priority work items.
Oh,
Joe, are you talking to mute?
okay, thank you so much. All right, we're going to go. Oh, maybe I am.
Oh, no, we can hear you now.
Let's see.
We can hear you now.
Yep. Oh, okay. Maybe I'm on a big delay. Am I on a delay? Yeah, I think I'm just greatly delayed. I think that's what's going on. So let me share my screen. Hopefully the audio will catch up. So let's get going. All right, we have a. All right. So looking at the proposed work items, it looks like we've gotten some new ones. So that's great. We'll definitely be going through those. What I wanted to talk about was, again, to get into a regular cadence, the kinds of things that we'll be doing. We'll be reviewing new material, which we have today. We'll be reviewing the allocation of all the items to the use cases. So I know that last week a few people jumped in and added some X's where they thought they were appropriate. Feel free to do that. If you've reviewed these items, like for example the documents versus clinical scenarios, that item is a pretty straightforward item. It's saying when you have clinical scenario X, you should use this document type. Like for example, if you have a hospital discharge, you should use the discharge summary type, but it also is meant to have a good, better, best mapping. So if we want to allow for, well, you really should use, the best is to use a discharge summary, but if you can only generate a CCD, well, then you can use that. That's what that is, just as an example, row 5. And so we haven't really mapped that to any of our use cases. So so let's do that. That's some easy low-hanging fruit right now. As I just described that, what would you think that would align with? I guess probably provider to provider. Someone's adding that. It probably benefits everyone, I'm going to guess. And I would say probably also end user usability. It's kind of a more or less a general improvement to do this. Anyway, so does that look good for row 5 before we move on? Okay. Oh, and I also wanted to go back to Great, thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, I will jump ahead to these new ones very quickly. But let's see. I did have a question, or somebody had a question about data provenance. Is that interesting? Does that apply to the provider to public health agency use case? Is that clear to anybody? I guess it depends. It depends really on maybe rather than thinking about whether these work items apply to the use case, maybe the more appropriate thing would be to think through the use case and say, does this use case intersect with data provenance? So currently, we were considering just using the basic provenance paper from HL7, which is essentially just author and author timestamp, making sure that's there. Well, provenance can be a lot more things. And so for some of these use cases, you may find you need more provenance, like you may need traceability back to a document that was the original source of something when you have a new document that has, say, reconcile meds. So that's one of those things I want you to think about. So in other words, the mapping to these may still be fluid. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. It could be the case that as we walk these use cases, we identify new ways in which we need to leverage data provenance. Okay. So, all right. So as Craig says, well, let's just put this here as an X. I think this is a general thing. All right. Let's move on. Let's see. So documents versus clinical scenarios, populating meaningful narratives. So narratives definitely is an end user usability thing, I would say. Physicians want data provenance. Great, thank you, Holly. What I would suggest, Ms. Dr. Miller, is if you check out this, each page, we have just a little bit of information here about what's needed in the realm of data provenance. So we have like render a deduplicated longitudinal view of a patient. If you have ideas where you can describe the specific things that physicians would need out of data provenance, this is the place to put those. That way we can prioritize that, configure scope. Okay. And let's see. Does Holly, Dr. Miller, would you like to throw something in here now, or do you want to do this offline and then we'll come back to it?
I'd prefer to do that offline.
Works for me. Okay. So we'll go back. All right. So provenance covers a lot of things. Guidance for patient summaries. This is kind of we added a bunch of guidance for patient summaries in the existing guide. And you can see the sections that we mapped. So this is like next tasks. So this would be, do we want to refine our guidance around populating things, dealing with requested date ranges? Do we want to deal with one size fits all versus multiple flavors of CCDs? That sort of thing. Is that something we want to take on? So if you have ideas about this topic, please add them on that page, but we haven't allocated it to anything. My guess is this, the thing about different flavors is, I don't know, which of these use cases would you say that this intersects with? I would probably say provider to provider. Certainly for like a transition of care use case, that patient summary is the main vehicle. Do the public health agencies tend to use the big patient summary, or do they use encounter summaries, or do they not really care because they're looking for, say, particular conditions?
I don't know of any use cases where public health uses like an encounter summary. There's certainly similar things in terms of case reports and such that are of use, but I don't really think of them as sort of the encounter summaries as you typically see in patient care.
Well, I think it
Okay.
probably depends on the context that public health is getting it for. I mean, there's, you know, case reporting, but there's also case investigation, which they absolutely do request today. Some of the encounter details within a certain, you know, querying for a specific time range, looking for data for specific time range and tied to whatever the case is that's being investigated. So I think that they would be looking for both potentially, depending on the context, and, you know, different flavors of patient summaries. They may want something different in, you know, looking at the patient summary, something different than what you would exchange provider to provider. So some of that different flavor of summary may be different flavor across use cases.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, that I'll say that the section on patient summaries in the most recent guide was pretty challenging because there is an interesting use case related to generating a patient summary based on a date range of interest. And so there is an optional capability described that if you support this capability and somebody asks you for 5 years about a patient, you can generate a patient summary that actually includes 5 years of data. It's an optional capability that we describe it in that guide. If that needed to be specified further, maybe to support particular use cases, that's the work item for that. Does that help? Okay. All right, we'll sit on that one for a little bit. Best practices for rendering documents. I mean, that's obviously an end user usability. We can revisit these, by the way, as we walk these use cases, because I think maybe at some point that's what we do is we switch the dimension that we apply in these meetings to, well, let's walk a provider to public health agency use case and let's see how that use case intersects with these items. All right, so let's see what else we have. Expand guidance for sharing entries within and across documents. We've already got some guidance on that, and that guidance is that when you share the same thing across multiple documents, like the same condition, you know, the same broken leg across multiple documents, that you'll use the same ID, and that allows consumers to handle the duplicates more gracefully. Like they can choose to hide duplicate occurrences from the user because they've already seen it from one document, or gray it out or something. The expanded guidance we're talking about is going a little deeper into that use case, and that would be if the condition changes severity, for example, over time. Is there guidance there where you can keep track that it's the same thing across multiple documents, but also account for the fact that it may have changed state? And so what use cases would you think that would map to?
I mean, I think it maps to all of them. I mean, any exchange where there are potentially multiple documents being exchanged, you're going to want to be able to track a single entry that occurs in multiple documents.
Yeah, I could see that. I think the tricky thing with healthcare to consumer is that in these other cases, you're more likely to have a receiving software system that can take what's in the document and do some extra processing. You know, so like if you're presenting it to a provider, it's more likely that that can do intelligent processing and identify duplicates and things that are derived, et cetera. Whereas when you're presenting it to a consumer, I guess I think of it more, you're more likely that the consumer is just going to be viewing it through like a style sheet, and it may not have the ability to be as sophisticated in how it displays. But
I would
I
say
guess
that
we would have
in
to prove
general,
that.
that's probably true. But I mean, there are some pretty sophisticated, patient health records out there that even participate in, care equality and Commonwealth and are exchanging documents and doing stuff with the data to give a better display of it to the patient today, beyond just slap it on a style sheet and hope the patient understands it. So
Right.
it'll certainly vary by application and how much they do with it. They're obviously not doing like reconciliation of data and making decisions off of it probably, but being able to deduplicate and give a clean view to the patient is something that I would expect apps to at least attempt to do.
Okay. Good.
I'd like to point out, I think if I understand it correctly, we're pushing towards patients having access to their data through like some form of app, and that would certainly require that that we have good data sharing capabilities to the consumer.
Right. Right. So yeah, that's a really good point. So I'll definitely consider this covered by this, because a lot of these, these are edge cases, right? It's an edge case when you have something that changes state or something that's derived and that sort of thing. But you have to account for those edge cases if you're creating an app for a consumer to see, and so we can help to head off any weird usability issues by addressing this. Okay, good. Referral notes and consultation notes, that's probably most provider to provider, I would guess. Guidance for longitudinal view. I think this feels like an overloaded topic. Trying to remember what the requests were. All right, so we've already addressed the notion that we have a single holistic view of the patient as one patient summary and encounter document per encounter. Tasks remaining. Okay, so yeah, so we're still, I think we still need clarification on this request. Like, what's the specific ask? All right. Identify the same encounter coming from two different sources due to different unique IDs. All right, so this feels to me, this is a good pain point. I would say let's put this one under the guidance for duplicate data. Let's see the next one. Would you agree? We'll move this one to duplicate data. And we may already have it covered. Okay, trade-off for patient-centric healthcare with the patient taking control, which clinician gets to see which data elements. This feels like an access control issue. Do I have that right? And I don't think we've touched on that use case. Feels like a pretty important one, but I also know that this has been taken up by a number of work groups. Patient-directed consent, patient-directed access control. So maybe that we just leverage work that other groups have done, but I'm sensing this is its own, this is kind of a general topic. Okay, I see some agreements there. So let's move this to a new topic. Something like that. And then focus list of encounters with time frame and CPT codes. All right, let's drill in on this. So we already have the ability to query for encounters within a time frame. That's already there. Is this this came from VHIE? Is there a need to query for encounters where something happened, where a particular code showed up. Is that the request? Whoever added this remark?
My guess is
Okay.
that was Sandy Mitchell and her team that added that. I don't think I see Sandy on.
Okay. I'll just make a note here. Okay. And then,
So Joe, just a comment on that one. I don't know exactly either what was intended there, but the question you asked, being able to query for, an encounter, not just based on time range, but based on something that happened within it, I think would be pretty awesome if that were possible. I mean, provider to provider, that would be helpful in probably a lot of cases. I'm thinking public health in particular, right? The reason they go grab encounter documents is because they're doing a case investigation, and so they're looking for specific things related to the reportable condition or whatever that they're doing the investigation on. Being able to find any encounter that has something with that in it, rather than just saying, give me every encounter that happened over the last year and I'll sort through them, would be pretty nice.
So I've actually thought about this, and there are two angles to approach this that are already in underlying specs but are underutilized. The first is this notion that if you query for a patient and you start with a patient summary as kind of a table of contents, the patient summary, the CCD, has a section for encounters that includes a diagnosis, and so that may be enough to tell you at a glance, okay, I see these 24 encounters, and I see, oh, I'm interested in that one, and I'm interested in that one. You can then look up just the documents for those encounters. So there are mechanisms by which you can search for a specific encounter ID. We haven't specified them yet, but that mechanism exists. Okay.
Right.
So
and I think that you're right. That could satisfy, especially if you're looking for a diagnosis in an encounter, and that gap is one that maybe we could tackle as a starting point. Because today, you get back the list of encounters and they have encounter IDs, but your .query list comes back with document IDs, not encounter IDs. So that transaction that, as you said, exists but isn't widely used, or maybe needs some further definition to be able to query based on an encounter ID, would be pretty slick to be able to grab the specific encounter document for the encounter that you saw in the list with the specific diagnosis.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's one idea. We could look into that. And then the other idea is it's a little more, it would need to be thought through, but there's a field in document metadata called event code list that allows you to add codes of things that you've done. It's not necessarily a diagnosis, but it could be that you performed a colonoscopy. And I think that was Tom's question. That's there, but there's really no guidance that I'm aware of in any of the underlying specifications or in the production exchanges around using that or populating that. And so it could be that we could define some cases where that would be a good thing to populate. So you would say, you would add to the metadata for a document for an encounter that I did a colonoscopy in this. That's already there. We could add guidance around that. And then you could search for documents where a colonoscopy was performed. So that's another angle. As far as a document where a particular diagnosis was found, we'd have to think that one through. But there may be a way to do that too. And of course, there's always fire. You know, we could do a lot of this stuff with fire. So it's, you know, we don't have to stop with documents. All right. So
and Joe, sorry, I think that, I mean, that's a good
any
point.
questions?
You know, the purpose or the you know, name of the work group, this isn't document specific, this is data usability.
Right.
So data comes in multiple ways, and that data can be used together. So maybe that is part of what gets looked at there, is what if I pulled in a fire, you know, procedure, you know, list of all of the patient's procedures, and I see some past colonoscopies, and I want to go get some of the additional encounter information from when that colonoscopy occurred. Is there a way that I can take an item in a fire resource and find which encounter it ties to grab the full CDA for the encounter summary?
Yeah, there is, and we could certainly add specifics to say populate those things. In other words, the hooks are there in fire for all sorts of cross-related information. It's just that sometimes you need a little bit of extra guidance to both populate those cross-references and then also guidance for servers to support querying on those cross-references. And that's certainly something we could add. Should documents all be indexed by diagnosis, problem, and procedures? Interesting. It's something to look into. It's something we could certainly look into. So that, again, that feels like it's a whole different thing. We might say, well, I don't know, we'll figure out a name for that, but I think that's a different thing that will explode out into its own issue. Would someone like take an action to break that out into an issue? Because I'm probably going to give it to Alan if nobody else if nobody else volunteers. Maybe Dee Dee might want to take it, or any one of you can.
Joe, you're just talking about specifically about the most recent comment.
Yeah,
about
well,
indexing based on diagnosis, problem, or procedure, or you're talking more generally just about all these issues we've talked through?
well, this last one, the last one was triggered by CPT codes. If that is one item, one potential work item, or is it 3 potential work items? You know, I kind of feel like it could be 3 individually managed ones, but they could kind of be, you know, identified under a certain umbrella. Because I think we want to prioritize them, you know, appropriately. What do you think?
Yeah, I think what we need to do, Joe, is we do need to confirm the information from, you know, the submitter. So I can help follow up with Sandy Mitchell and the VHE team since I have regular calls with them. But I do think we
Right.
want to make sure we understand the scope, we understand what it is, and then, you know, that'll help inform us how to prioritize it, whether it gets included in the IG or not. Once we actually start writing it, but understanding what is the pain point is really what we want to get. So I'll help with that part.
Right. That's a good point, Dee Dee. Thank you for bringing that home, because, you know, what we actually did was we took like 8 characters and wrote a story based on those. And so we did kind of brainstorm a little bit about, well, would you need this or would you need that? And I was watching the chat and it looked like we were on a track that was interesting, even if it wasn't the particular pain point that was originally identified. But a certain amount of these sessions, I would like us to continue down that road. Like we're still brainstorming, and there will be a time where we will be more focused on, okay, we're drilling down on this one particular item so that we can understand it, to scope it and prioritize it. But I think I would like to keep it open for brainstorming these ideas. But I think my general comment here is let's start, those of you who are getting involved in adding items and everything, I would like us to start sorting them a little bit more. You know, I look for, if you got an item that's already covered somewhere else, let's, you know, add your use case to where it's already covered and move things around, because they're starting to get a little bit, I don't know. We need to sort them a little bit. All right, moving on. So let's see. So that was guidance for a longitudinal view, and it had some other things. So I think we're going to leave this alone for now because I think we explode some things out from this. We have codes and discrete data elements, which if I remember correctly, this is a lot of overlap with the labs. So let's see what we've got. Yes. All right. Meaningful code sets based on condition and truth, source of truth for codes. All right, so they're source transformation to the required value set. Do we want to talk about this? This came up last week, and there was some there was a statement made, and I want to. Is Andrea on the call? Okay. I think at some point we'll want to return to this and figure out whether or not whether or not it's in our scope to even consider transformation. And I shouldn't say transformation, I mean translations, where you leave the original code in place, but you add a translation. And what I'm thinking is that for all the lab related issues, we probably want a dedicated set of calls because they'll probably go pretty deep, even to determine scope. I want to ask Dee your opinion on that.
Yeah, what we can do, so let's make sure on the next co-chair prep call we discuss it with the co-chairs too to make sure they're in agreement. But I think we should have a focus call, but I think we should wait till we get a little further through this brainstorming or firestorming, so to speak here. But I think we can do a dedicated call, and if we need to, we could always do off-cycle calls. So have another call that's focused on that's not part of this work group. So those are the two options: having a dedicated call with the right subject matter experts to really drill down to it, or use one of these calls to do that as well. So I think that's the real question to the team.
Yeah, this is Bill. I agree with that. I think we'll have to make sure we keep it within the scope of what this phase is doing, because I know we were talking about that. Certainly when we get into the next phase, we are going to have dedicated work groups that are going to go into different areas that'll bring in that expertise. So I want to make sure we don't try to go too far and trying to solve the problem, but really just trying to bucket what we are going to solve and keep it limited to that.
Yeah,
Right.
understanding the pain point really. So
Yeah.
striking the balance. If we do need to, in other words, I'm open to having a call. I think it's just a matter of making sure that we don't, in other words, we only have now 14, 15 more of these calls left. So we need to make sure that we utilize the time to get the right scope and have those dialogues as well. So.
And it may be that if we come down to some different areas that we do want to out of those remaining 14, or however, even if we get down to the last 10, we might want to take a handful of those and make those dedicated in certain areas, because we'll want to hash through some issues and want to make sure that certain expertise is on the call. That's another option too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as we prioritize based on that list, then that, and with that scope wrapped around it, then we can really determine how granular and deep dive we can take.
Yep. Great. Okay. So what I will say is considering that this item has had a lot of interest and people have added things, what I would like to assign as homework for those of you who have put things in here is, like, if you read through, there's a lot of guidance, and what we need right now is scope. So for example, all this guidance that's written in blue, you should consider this, you should look at that. That's the kind of thing we just want to scope out. So this document should have an action item, a work item, add guidance around X. And that action item should speak to what guidance already exists. So if there's a guidance already that we've supplied, well, modify this section because this says the wrong thing, or add a new section to cover this because you didn't cover this. I'd like to see these things. Let's start to massage the text in these documents and make it more about scope than it is about solving the problem. Okay. All right, so let's move on. All right, now let's move to the new section. I think Bill, Greg's got this. We were going to take his item for usability of vital signs and volume considerations, and we're going to do like a little experimental dive. So Bill, you want to come off mute and let's talk about this.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so you've got a, I think you have a document that you have already provided. Let me see if I've already got it open. I think I do. All right, so here's a problem. I'm going to pause and let the group read through this. It's nicely, concisely stated.
And just adding some commentary while everybody's reading is, this was, I think this is not a problem that is in every instance or, in every encounter or document sharing, but it does rear its head. And we've seen different systems choke on the volume of data. And so kind of looking at, especially if it's something that might grow over time, how might we address it? Or has it already been addressed in some other area, at least partially?
So this is Lisa Nelson. Are you allowed to think about things like existing templates like section time range as solutions, or
Absolutely.
what's the scope for thinking about this?
I would think so. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, the scope is to improve usability of data. So any tool at hand that's appropriate to use, we want to elevate that.
Yeah, because I think one of the issues is that when these things are generically implemented in a given EHR and you start sharing data, they may not all be configured in the same way, especially if you're using certain templates, and so giving that more specific guidance, I think, can be helpful, especially in some systems where they may not, whoever's using it or configuring it may not be as knowledgeable in a particular area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
So
think this goes to the
problem
heart of the usability when it comes to signal to noise, and the clear context and what's clinically relevant from that signal to noise. It's a great example.
I need to request edit access. Okay. All right. So
I know that this problem was mentioned as a driving force behind the creation of the section time range template, and why there's strong guidance in the existing documentation produced by this, I guess, an earlier version of this work group, to suggest that that the section time range template be included in every section, which I'm not sure everybody's processed that all the way through their thinking yet. And
that's a good point, Lisa.
Disconnect that it's new knowledge, and maybe a lot of people don't know that statement was made out there.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so we do have guidance on using the section time range, and I think we have in our joint guide, I think we have, I don't know if it's a you must include it in all sections, but where I would see
there is a statement like that, which I'm concerned about, because it is such strong language and no one's doing it.
Right. Well, this hasn't become normative yet, though. It's gone through some versions, but I don't know if anybody from Care Quality or Commonwealth is on and can speak to the time timeliness of this document, either the 1.1 version or the 2.0 that just came around. I know the 2.0 is not normative because it's still under review. So it may be that you know, people haven't done it yet because they're not required. So right now it's a should, looks like, for should include the section time range, and this is specifically for a patient summary, which is the reason this is valid. Thank you, Jason. It's not a requirement in either Commonwealth or Care Quality yet. The reason that this is more pertinent to a patient summary is that with an encounter summary, we already have requirements that things like meds and problems and so on will be things that were known at the time of that encounter. So you're already required that those things are already time sensitive. Whereas when you're generating a patient summary, there is, thank you, Jason. Yeah, and when you're doing a patient summary, there's a lot of variability, and a lot of generating systems, probably virtually all, have made decisions about things like, well, are we going to include all vitals if you ask for 5 years, or are we going to give you like 30 days of vitals or the last 10 vitals or something like that? And the way the section time range thing works is not only can you specify, you can say this section covers 30 days, but you can also provide text that explains it. And so you can say something, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but you could say something like this covers 30 days, but it maxes out at the last 10 or some 10 entries. Couldn't it have some business rule like that?
So that is a very good question. We've had quite a few people who've been experimenting with this get at this desire to have count, not just time range. So the semantic expressivity of the template itself would not be able to carry that human information yet. Right now, it's only got the ability to express the time range. And we haven't, you know, the template could be improved, more aligned with like the stuff that has been done in FHIR around kind of like last 5 readings or something like that. And we could have an entry relationship added to the template that would get at this counting aspect as well. But right now, its only power is over a range of time.
I see.
Yeah,
okay.
And that's interesting, that notion of using counting, because I think that might get closer to what the pain point that I was talking about. Because if you look even at a time range where it's covering an entire month of hospitalization, you could easily still run into massive volumes of data for particular high frequency things.
Right. I mean, I could see this would be pretty valuable to get much more expressive. Like I want, you know, the min and the max over a period of time, or I want the you know, the last 3 or most recent 1, or you know, I could see this being very, very valuable. And there's been some work thinking about in the profile called implementation guide called CDEX in FHIR, around actually being able to pass an expression that describes what you're constraining to. So, you know, that the language we wouldn't have to pre-think all of it so much, that the template would carry the expression that in fact is the constraint for how the data was narrowed down on a section by section basis.
So Lisa, do you mean that if you were to see a section and that section had a certain template ID, you could go look that template ID up and it would say, this means that this section has the last 10 of these, something like that?
No, the template would be structured so that there would be a string carried in the template, so that the template, let's say it's like the next version of this section constraining template, and the template would carry a string that in fact was an expression that, if executed, produces the narrow, slimmed down, or you know, precisely wanted set of data that would be shown in carried in the section.
Okay, that's very helpful. So if we were now, if I had edit access to this, and we'll fix that. But this is a good.
I granted you edit access.
Oh, you did. Okay, good.
It should. I don't know if you have to refresh. Yeah.
See, I'll refresh. Okay, good. So so I see a few angles on which we can attack this, and I would say that there's kind of an overall pattern to these kinds of things, and it trips up, I think, a lot of groups looking at this sort of thing, and that is this a case where there's one way to do it and we want to specify what that one way is, or where there are multiple legitimate ways to do it and we want to capture what those are? And if there are multiple, is it that you want to give the requester a say in which of those ways is done? Like, would you want to say, okay, I want a document, but I want this document to have everything because I'm going to pass this into a mega processor that's going to graph out vitals and it's going to look for spikes and things like that. Whereas another requester would say, no, just give me the last 48, 72 hours. That's the kind of scope that we'll think about for this item, because those would be vastly different things. You know, one would be figuring out one way, and one would be figuring out multiple ways, and how you indicate that you want one of those multiple ways.
Yeah, and I really like that notion of kind of, you know, being able to have that expression in there that really can state, and it might give us some flexibility as we really make recommendations around that about addressing this. And the notion of doing it from the requester side makes a lot of sense. I do worry about the more naive requesters not knowing what they're going to get, but I imagine that's something that would correct itself pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this trying to think about this from a larger point of view. Bill is talking about ICUs more specifically, but I'm wondering about any kind of streamed data. For example, remote patient monitoring would possibly be in this scope. I don't know. I want to throw that out.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I think this was just one example, but I think this could be a theme that might stretch into other areas. And the notion of high volume, high frequency data is going to continue to grow, probably in realms that many of us have not even thought of yet.
Yeah. So let me make sure that I understand what was just said. Who was that, by the way, that was speaking besides Bill?
It was me, Jonathan Howell, the troublemaker.
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for making trouble. I think you're onto something there, that and I'm going to guess that other groups have already thought this through, that maybe taking a bunch of high volume, high frequency data and putting it into a document isn't necessarily the best way to communicate it. Was that what you were getting at? Like, maybe there's just a better channel to use for that sort of thing?
Yeah, it seems like putting, I like to think of it as streams of data that are constantly being updated, and that just doesn't seem to fit in the single document format.
Yeah. Okay. There has to have been groups that have talked about this, and there has to be somebody on this call who has been in those groups, right? Someone who's not on mute. Well then, we're the first.
Could be a new profile, a streaming profile.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that intuitively seems like the right way to think about this. You know, because you think of the internet treats streaming data differently, you know, than others, and they're optimized protocols for doing that sort of thing. So maybe we do the same thing.
And Joe, you might want to look up, Lisa Lucas put a comment, working for an EMR vendor for a few years, I've seen more consistency, including last 48 to 72 hours of vital signs.
Right. Yep. So Lisa, would you say that is your typical ask when the consumer is really just a human reader?
Yes, if they're just, looking at data, because there's so many vital signs taken so often, it was really slowing down systems trying to retrieve data and looking at documents, and it was a lot to fumble through for providers. So looking at the last 48 to 72 hours was consistent of what they could handle, and knowing that they discharge vital signs are always part of the document.
Right.
I think it also gets to relevant and pertinent, which is a white paper that was written quite some time ago, but it's still relevant and pertinent. Gobs and gobs of old data for things like vital signs just in most use cases are not relevant and pertinent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our implementations, like you're getting the most recent vital of each one because that seems to be pertinent, right? Like whether it's like if you want the full history, I don't think honestly a document is where you want to get that information from. Like as Alan said, like this is a data quality work group. A FHIR resource is probably much better if you want like a full history of vital signs more so than a document.
Yeah, I want to add that I think it will be, I mean, I think it does sound like, folks have solved this and these are largely workarounds and there may be some that have addressed it. But I know that many organizations, especially as information blocking rules come online, are going to have some nervousness about doing things like that to censor the data, and that they might be accused of information blocking, even if it's for practical reasons. And so having something guidance out there would be helpful, I think, for a lot of organizations.
That's
and this is Dr. Freed. We have just started remote patient monitoring this month, and it's getting data in the outpatient world that will be put in our chart as a month's worth of blood pressures and A1Cs and O2 saturations. It might be multiple readings every day. So it's not an exclusively hospital problem.
That's a great point. And yeah, especially with the continuous glucose monitors becoming more and more common.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. We're right at time. Dee Dee, do you want to wrap up or? But before you do, thank you, everybody, for a really good conversation. As always, you have homework to go and add your issues and clarify other issues and sort and trim as appropriate. Over to you, or to all the hosts, actually.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
A reminder just to everybody, meeting materials will be available online by tomorrow. So if you want to follow up or want to catch up on anything, definitely go there. And over to the co-chairs.
Thanks, Dee Dee and Joe. And really appreciate Joe. Great job running that discussion. I thought it was a wonderful discussion. Really appreciate everybody's feedback.
Yep, exactly the same. Thanks. Really, I think it's the structure is really gelling, and appreciate the input, and keep it coming. So thanks.
Well, with that, everyone have a great rest of your week and a great rest of your day. Take care, stay safe, and we'll talk to you same time next week. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.